My husband's body was barely in the ground when his brother pulled me aside and asked about the investment accounts. I was still wearing the black dress, the one I'd bought years ago for funerals. The one I kept at the back of the closet because my husband always said I looked too thin in it. His brother waited until the last of the neighbors had filed out, then lowered his voice the way men do when they want to sound gentle but mean business. "There are some accounts that need to be managed soon," he said. "I told Roger I'd handle the transition. You don't need to worry about the details." I looked at him. He had the same jaw as my husband, the same habit of tilting his head when he spoke, as if patience was something he performed. "He talked to you about our accounts?" I asked. He nodded like that was obvious. He wanted everything in order. You know how he was. I did know. I just hadn't known it went this far. I didn't cry at the funeral. People kept watching me for it. A soft collapse, a hand pressed to the lips, something cinematic. My husband's old colleagues from the firm stood in a cluster near the back. One of them touched my hand and said, "He was one of a kind." I said, "Yes, he was." And I meant something entirely different. I wasn't numb. I wasn't in shock. I was simply free in a way I had no language for yet. That night, after everyone was gone and the casseroles were stacked in the refrigerator, and my daughter had called twice from Seattle to check on me, I walked through the house in my stocking feet. Same furniture. Same smell of lemon polish he insisted on. Same carpet he'd chosen without asking me. But everything had a different weight to it now. Like a room after a long illness finally passes. The air doesn't know what to do with itself. My feet took me to the basement door. He had called it his workroom. 31 years we lived in this house, and I could count on one hand the number of times I'd been inside it. He kept it padlocked, an actual padlock, the heavy brass kind, and when I asked about it in the early years, he said it was where he kept client files, confidential materials. He was a financial advisor, it made sense, so I stopped asking. Even after he retired, the padlock stayed. He'd go down after dinner and stay for hours. I'd hear the creak of the stairs, then silence. Sometimes I'd be reading in bed when he came back up, and he'd smell like old paper and machine oil. And I'd say nothing, because by then I'd learned that his silence was easier than his explanations. I stood at the door now, the padlock hung in its loop, locked of course. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep. By morning, I had a locksmith's number written on the notepad by the phone. The man who came was young, barely 30, with kind eyes, and no interest in my reasons. He had the lock open in under 10 minutes. "These old ones are simpler than they look," he said. He didn't ask what was inside. I appreciated that more than I could say. When the door swung open, the smell came first. A closed, mineral smell. Concrete and old cardboard and something I couldn't name. The kind of smell that lives in spaces no one airs out. The stairs were narrow. I held the railing. The room was larger than I expected. My husband had built shelving along 2 walls, floor to ceiling, every shelf labeled with a black marker in his careful block letters. A workbench ran along the far wall, clear and wiped down. A filing cabinet, dark green, sat in the corner. A single floor lamp. A clock that had stopped at 4:47. I stood in the center and turned slowly. It was all very orderly, very him. Then I looked at the shelves more closely. The labels read things like household accounts, teen, joint expense, tracking, property mints, and then beneath those, my name, over and over again. My name, medical, my name, behavior, my name, contacts. I didn't move for a long moment. On the workbench, held down by a small metal clip, was an envelope. My first name written across the front in his handwriting. Just my first name. No last name. As if there might be another woman in this house he needed to distinguish me from. Inside was a typed sheet. Instructions, essentially. Contact my brother-in-law immediately regarding all financial accounts. Do not attempt to reorganize household expenses without consulting him. Continue medical appointments as scheduled. Avoid unnecessary stress. Rest. Take medication as prescribed. No greeting, no closing, no thank you for 31 years. I set the paper on the bench. I sat down on the only stool in the room, and I looked at the shelving unit labeled with my name. I opened the first binder. Inside were copies of my prescription records going back 8 years, with handwritten notes in the margins. Increased dosage, approved. Dosage reduced after complaint, monitor for agitation. I hadn't complained about my medication. I had said once, in passing, that I felt foggy. He had mentioned it to my doctor at my next appointment while I sat in the chair beside him, nodding along because it was easier than explaining that the fog was him. I opened a second binder. It held a log, typed dated entries going back more than a decade. October 4th. Appeared disoriented at dinner, repeated a question twice. November 19th. Expressed confusion about utility bill. Redirected. Showed resistance to scheduled activity. Mood unstable. I remembered March 8th. I had said I didn't want to go to his colleague's dinner party. I was tired. He told me I wasn't feeling well and put me to bed with a glass of water, and I'd thanked him for being so considerate. The room swayed slightly. I pressed my hand flat to the edge of the workbench. This wasn't a workspace. This was a case file. He had been building it for years. Every small moment of ordinary humanity, forgetting a question, being tired, not wanting to go somewhere, had been recorded, dated, filed. I closed the binder and opened the filing cabinet. The top drawer held bank statements for accounts I didn't recognize, accounts in his name alone, investment portfolios I'd never seen. I did a rough calculation in my head, the kind you do when you already know the answer is going to hurt. The numbers were significant, not modest savings. Years of redirected income, rerouted somewhere I had no access to and had never been told existed. The second drawer held something worse. It was an insurance file. Our life insurance policy, 30 years old, recently updated. I found the amendment near the back, signed, dated 16 months ago. He had changed the beneficiary. It used to be me. Now it was his brother. My brother-in-law. The same man who'd asked about the investment accounts before the reception table was cleared. I sat with that for a long time. The clock on the wall said 4:47, had said 4:47 for however long it had been stopped. The silence in that room was absolute. Then, underneath the insurance file, I found the emails, printed, hole-punched, organized into a plastic sleeve. Correspondence between my husband and his brother, spanning 3 years. I read slowly. She's been increasingly unreliable with financial decisions. I've been managing everything for years. She doesn't realize how much. A reply from his brother. Do you think she could contest the accounts if it came to that? My husband's response. No. She trusts me completely. That's the whole point. Another exchange from 2 years ago. I've updated the insurance. If something happens before we finalize the rest, at least that's handled. The rest. I didn't know what the rest was. I was fairly sure I didn't want to. I stood from the stool. My knees were stiff. I walked to the foot of the stairs and looked back at the room. The shelves, the binders, the meticulous labeling of everything, including me. He hadn't kept a workroom. He had kept a control center, and for 31 years, I'd made his tea and driven myself to book club and assumed the distance between us was just the ordinary quiet that settles into long marriages. I walked upstairs and closed the basement door. I didn't lock it. That afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. I made a list. At the top, I wrote my brother-in-law's name. Below that, attorney, and below that, a name I hadn't written in years, Nola. Nola and I had been friends since our 30s. We'd met in a pottery class at the community center. 2 women who were both terrible at centering clay and excellent at conversation. We saw each other every week for years, then gradually, less. My husband didn't say he disliked her, not directly. He said she seemed unsettled, that her choices reflected a certain restlessness he worried was contagious. I told myself I was just busy. I told myself friendships faded naturally. I hadn't spoken to her in 6 years. She picked up on the second ring. Oh my lord, she said. Is it really you? I told her my husband had died. She said she was sorry. Then there was a pause, and she said quietly, how are you? Really? I told her I needed to say something first. I told her what I'd found in the basement. She listened without interrupting, which is a gift very few people know how to give. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he called me. I asked when. About 7 years ago. Said you were going through a difficult time. Something about your health, your memory. He wasn't specific. Said you'd asked him to reach out to some of your close friends and let them know you needed quiet, that you'd be in touch when you were ready. A pause. I sent you a card. You never wrote back. I never received a card. Nola, I said, I never asked him to call you. Another silence. Then she said very gently, I know. I think I always suspected. I just didn't know what to do with that. I hung up the phone and sat very still. Outside, the neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard, the ordinary world continuing as if nothing had shifted beneath it. I called an attorney the next morning. He was younger than I expected, with reading glasses he kept taking off and putting back on as he read through the documents I'd brought. He went through the insurance amendment, the financial accounts, the printed emails. He read the behavior logs without comment, but I watched his face change. These logs, he said slowly, the earliest date you found, when was that? 2012, I said. He set the binders on his desk and looked at me. What he did here with the financial accounts and the insurance, that's actionable on its own. But these logs, combined with the emails, he paused. This looks like a deliberate pattern, documentation built to support a narrative about your cognitive state, in case you ever challenged anything. I know, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Were you ever formally evaluated? For memory cognition? He took me to my doctor twice a year. He came into every appointment. I paused. He drove me there. He stayed in the room. He answered when the doctor asked how I was doing. The attorney wrote something on his notepad. Did you ever speak to anyone alone? Any appointment? Any visit? I thought about it. Once, a nurse practitioner when he was parking the car, she asked how I was feeling. I said fine. She said I seemed well. He came in before she finished the intake. He nodded slowly. All of that is worth documenting, everything you just told me. I told him there was more. I told him about the labels on the shelves, the records of my daily behavior, the contacts his brother had already initiated before I'd had a chance to move. The instructions left for me, addressed like a memo to an employee. He leaned back in his chair. I want to review everything, he said, but my strong feeling is that you have a very solid case. The question is how quickly your brother-in-law acts. He's already acting, I said. He mentioned the accounts the day of the funeral. The attorney didn't look surprised. He looked prepared. Then we moved faster. My brother-in-law called 3 days later. His voice was careful, measured, the voice of a man who'd been coached. I think we got off on the wrong foot, he said. I only want what my brother wanted, to see you taken care of. Your brother wanted to have me declared unreliable, I said. I read the emails. A pause. Then those were private correspondence. They were in my house, in a room I own. You're upset, he said. That's understandable. But you should know that the accounts are legally. I've retained an attorney, I said. The silence that followed was different from the silences I'd learned to interpret in my husband. This one was calculating, reassessing the board. That's your right, he said finally, but this will be expensive and complicated. I've been living complicated for 31 years, I told him. I have some experience. I hung up. My granddaughter came to stay with me the following weekend. She's 17, and she has her mother's directness and a sharp eye for things that don't add up. She was helping me carry boxes up from the basement. I decided to rearrange everything, to make it mine. When she stopped on the stairs, a binder in her hands. Grandma, she said, what is this? She was holding the behavior log, open to a page from 2015. I sat down on the bottom step. Come here, I said, I'll tell you. I told her all of it, in plain language without softening any edges. She sat beside me and listened, and when I finished, she looked at the page in her hand. He tracked you like a science project, she said. Yes. That's not love. She said it the way teenagers say true things, simply without ceremony, as if it were obvious. That's just control. The word landed somewhere deep. I had been turning over so many others. Manipulation, deception, betrayal, but she'd gone straight to the root. Yes, I said, it is. She placed the binder carefully in the box, marked for the attorney, and hugged me. Tight and unself-conscious. The way she only hugged when she meant it all the way. That night, after she'd gone to sleep in the guest room, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote out a statement. Not for the court, for myself. Every memory I could pin down of a moment where I'd been spoken for, redirected, managed. My husband answering questions in my doctor's office. My husband explaining to the insurance agent that I was not involved in the financial details. My husband telling me a friend had called to cancel plans. I'd found out later she hadn't canceled anything. The list filled 3 pages. My sister drove down from Ohio when she heard what was happening. She sat at my kitchen table and read the emails with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug. And when she finished, she looked up and said, "He called me too." I wasn't surprised anymore. I was just tired of not being surprised. "5 years ago," she said, "he said you were having memory issues, that you'd seemed confused on the phone. He asked me to be patient with you, give you space." She pressed her lips together. "I thought he was worried about you. I thought he loved you." "He thought it was the same thing," I said. She reached across the table. "What do you need? What would actually help?" I told her. I needed her to write it down. What he'd said to her, word for word as best she remembered. She did that same evening on a yellow legal pad, 3 paragraphs in her small, tight handwriting. I filed it under supporting documentation. The hearing came on a Tuesday in late October. I wore the navy coat I'd bought myself the year before. One of the few things in my closet chosen without commentary. My attorney met me outside the courthouse and said I was ready. I told him I'd been ready for 30 years and just hadn't had the paperwork. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. Wood paneling, fluorescent overhead light, a clock on the wall that actually worked. My brother-in-law sat at the other table with his lawyer. He didn't look at me when I walked in. My attorney laid out the case methodically. The accounts in my husband's name that should have been joint. The insurance amendment made without my knowledge or consent. The printed emails. The behavior logs kept over a decade. The pattern of isolation. The calls made to Nola, to my neighbor, to my sister. All framed as concern. All functioning as containment. When my turn came, I stood without notes. "My husband was a careful man," I said. "He planned everything. He planned for his death, and he planned for what he wanted my life to look like after it. He built a structure, financial, legal, social, designed to ensure I couldn't function outside of it." The judge watched me steadily. "I want to be clear about one thing. I am not here because I am angry, though I am. I am not here for revenge, though I understand the appeal. I am here because decisions were made about my life without my knowledge or consent, and I am the only person with the right to make those decisions." I paused. He left instructions for me to follow after his death. He assumed I would follow them because I had always followed them. In small ways, in large ways, for 31 years. He assumed I was still the woman he had shaped. He was wrong. The judge recessed for 20 minutes. When she returned, her ruling was brief and firm. The accounts reverted to me. The insurance designation was voided. My brother-in-law was removed from any role in my estate. The judge used the phrase "documented pattern of financial and psychological control." And I wrote those words on the notepad in my lap because I wanted to see them in my own handwriting. My attorney said quietly, "It's done." Outside, the sky was a sharp October blue. My granddaughter was waiting at the bottom of the courthouse steps. She'd taken the bus and skipped a half day of school, which I only found out later. She waved when she saw me. I waved back. I drove home alone, which is how I wanted it. The first thing I did when I got back was go to the basement and open both small windows near the ceiling. They were painted shut and took some effort, but they gave. Cold air came in, thin and clean. The shelves still held the binders, but they were rearranged now, the ones with my name turned spine in. A small thing. Mine. I stood in the middle of the room and looked at the space he'd kept from me for 3 decades. It wasn't sinister now that I was in it on my own terms. It was just a room. Concrete floor, overhead light, the faint smell of old cardboard clearing out. He had made it into something else. A place of documentation, of quiet, meticulous management. But rooms are only what you decide to fill them with. Nola came over that Saturday. She brought coffee and didn't mention the years in between, which was exactly right. We sat in the kitchen and talked for 4 hours. The kind of talking that doesn't need catching up because it picks right back up from wherever the real conversation always was. At one point she said, "You never seemed unhappy. That's what gets me." I thought about it. I wasn't unhappy the way people expect. I wasn't crying. I wasn't miserable. I was just less. A smaller version of myself. And it happened slowly enough that I thought it was just age, just marriage, just how things go. She wrapped both hands around her mug. "How does it feel now?" I looked out the window at the oak tree he'd wanted cut down because it dropped too many leaves. I'd never agreed to it. Like the volume's been turned back up, I said. The basement became a reading room. I had a contractor take out the shelving along one wall and put in a proper window. Light came through it in long rectangles in the afternoon. I brought down 2 chairs and a lamp, and the books that had been boxed in the garage since we moved in. The ones, he said, cluttered the aesthetic of the main rooms. I kept the filing cabinet but filled it with things I was actually working on: the legal documents, the account information, a folder for myself the way he used to keep folders, except mine was labeled simply, mine. My granddaughter helped me paint the bedroom on a cold Saturday in November. We did 2 coats. The yellow was exactly what I'd pictured for 15 years. Warm, not loud, the color of late afternoon in a good season. She stood back when we finished and said, "It looks like you." I didn't know she knew what I looked like. It turned out she'd been paying attention all along. I keep a copy of the court ruling on my dresser. Not because I need to be reminded of what happened, but because I spent a long time in a house where the records were someone else's, and the conclusions were written before I had a chance to speak. Now there is a document with my name on it, in the part where names mean something. The part that says, "This belongs to her. She decides." If you've been reading this and something in the shape of it feels familiar, not the details, maybe, but the texture of it, the way control can dress itself up as care, the way silence can look like peace from the outside, I want you to know that recognizing it is already the beginning. The moment you see it clearly, you are already not who they said you were. Open the door, read the papers, call the friend you stopped calling. Your name still belongs to you. It always did.